last time we checked in on the two lovers of the Song of Songs, they had just been reunited after a very painful separation. You remember what happened. The man had come home to their bedchambers, and the woman hesitated to let him in. And when she finally did, he'd already left, and she experienced that terrible night of desperation and searching for him along the darkened city streets. That all takes place in chapter 5. But by the beginning of chapter 6, they have reunited with one another. And once again, they're celebrating their love. And he begins to repeat some of his earlier praises of her beauty. You remember what I'm talking about? How her hair is like goats, her teeth like sheep, her cheeks like pomegranates. Personally, I still don't get it. But it apparently works for her because she responds by speaking of her desire for him, and even goes so far as to call him a prince, which may be less of a response to the beauty of his words than a simple celebration of the fact that their recent misunderstanding has been overcome and their love is no longer in danger. At least that's how one commenter reads it, who writes, "The woman's fears that she had lost the man forever were false. He still loved her, in spite of her earlier coldness. When she heard the man's words and discovered that he still found her uniquely attractive, she was as enraptured as if she'd been caught up in a royal chariot with Prince Charming." But the man doesn't stop there. He isn't content with simply repeating his past praises or reaffirming his love. He goes further. He wants her to know the extent of his passion. He wants her to understand how desperately, how madly in love with her he really is. How there is no one who compares to her in his eyes. How he is completely and hopelessly enamored of her. So almost immediately after repeating his previous compliments, in chapter 7, he begins again, this time waxing poetically about the beauty of her feet and her thighs, her eyes and nose, her neck and her breasts. "Your navel," he says, "is a rounded bowl that never lacks wine. Your belly is a heap of wheat encircled with lilies. Your head crowns you like Mount Carmel, and your flowing locks are like purple. A king is held captive in the tresses." What is the significance of this celebration of the woman's beauty? How is it different than what came before? There are, of course, the obvious differences. In chapter 4, the man began his praises with the woman's head and moved down. Here he begins with her feet and moves up. These words are also, they seem more intimate and more alluding to childbearing, perhaps. Some modern scholars have pointed out that the mentions of wheat and wine are symbols of fertility. Martin Luther, for his part, found similar meaning in the reference to her belly, her navel, and even to the roundness of her thighs. Broader thighs, Luther said, are commended in young women because they are better fitted for childbearing. Make what you will of Luther's opinions about human physiology. There is undoubted merit to his suggestion that the husband seems to be praising not only his wife's beauty, but her potential beauty as a mother. But what most stands out aren't just his praises, it's what he says to her in verses 6 through 9. The Lutheran theologian Robert Jensen says that there is no poem in the song quite so bluntly lustful as these verses. And when you read them, you'll understand what he means. "How beautiful and pleasant you are, O loved one, with all your delights. Your stature is like a palm tree, and your breasts are like its clusters. I say, I will climb the palm tree and lay hold of its fruit. Oh, may your breasts be like clusters of the vine, and the scent of your breath like apples, and your mouth like the best wine." The woman understands exactly what her husband's saying to her. Because notice what she says in verse 10. "I am my beloved's, and his desire is for me." Not just I am my beloved's and he is mine, as she said before. Not just, I am my beloved's and he loves me or cares for me. I am my beloved's, she says, and he wants me. He desires me. And how does she respond to this blatant, unashamed desire? She welcomes it. She beckons him to come out with her to the country. And there she says, there I will give you my love. And then right after she speaks of giving him her love, she says something that sounds rather strange. She says that she wishes he were like her brother, and that if she found him outside, she would kiss him. This won't make much sense to modern Western readers, because we're not used to brothers and sisters greeting each other with such public displays of affection. And we're certainly not used to wives saying that they wish their husbands were their brothers. But her culture was different from ours. And in her culture, social norms didn't permit people, even husbands and wives, to kiss each other so openly. Only family members would have been able to show such affection. As one modern Indian biblical scholar observes, in ancient West Asia, as in much of South Asia today, social interaction between men and women was frowned upon. Even married couples were discouraged from any public expression of their love. However, a brother and sister could express some affection. That is why the woman wishes that her lover were her brother. Then she could easily kiss him, even in a public place. The man's desire for her has won her heart. So much so that she wants to give herself to him entirely and proclaim their love publicly for all the world to see. It's a sentiment that lovers know well. If you've ever been in love, you will no doubt understand how she feels. But what does this teach us about our spiritual lives? What can we learn from this about our relationship with Christ? Well, the first thing that it teaches us, or perhaps I should say the first thing that it reaffirms, because it's a message that's been repeated many times over at this point, is that Christ loves his people with a deep and passionate love. He doesn't just accept the church, he finds her beautiful. He adores her, he wants her. And that's a pretty shocking thing, if you think about it. Because if you're being honest, then you got to admit that the church often seems far from beautiful. To quote Robert Jensen, when the Lord looks at his people, he sees only what is beautiful, proud, and utterly desirable. But surely, if we view the naked reality of Israel and the church as the overt lover here views the woman, we see nothing like what the lover saw, but rather a people of God deformed, groveling to the surrounding cultures, and generally repellent. Thus, the Lord seems not only to be in love, but to be blinded by it. But is that true? Is the Lord truly so blinded by love that he doesn't see the ugliness of his people? Well, in a way, yes. But not simply because God doesn't see us for who we truly are. It's because he sees us as we are in union with his Son, Christ. We are those who have been clothed with the beauty of Jesus' own goodness, a goodness that overwhelms our every deficiency. We are also those who have been indwelt by God's own Spirit, a Spirit that is at work in us despite our failings and inadequacies, a Spirit who, amidst all the petty selfishness that we still find in the church, who is still able to inspire God's people to moments of great goodness and love. And also, as blind as the Lord's love may seem, when Jesus looks on us, he does not see us for who we are, but for who we will yet become. The Apostle Paul says that Jesus has washed his people, that he has cleansed them of their sins, and that he is continuing to sanctify them, so that he may one day present them to himself in splendor, unsullied by any fault, as radiant as the sun. We can't see ourselves that way, for we do not know who we will yet become. But He can, and He is willing to pay any price to make that happen. Although it may seem a bit of a stretch to you, you might be interested to hear how the 12th century theologian John Ford interpreted that poem about climbing the palm tree and grasping its fruit. We naturally interpret it as a man referring to his sexual desire for his wife. But John argued that there is actually another more profound meaning to it. An interpretation, he said, that makes plain sense to the unprejudiced mind and points to a hidden profundity of unfathomable wisdom. Because for John, the tree that the song mentions isn't just any tree. It is the cross. And when the man says that he wants to climb the tree and grasp its fruit, that is the voice of Jesus expressing his deep love and desire for his people, a love so deep that he is willing to ascend that terrible tree, all so that he can gain the fruit of a bride made beautiful by his love. Jesus was arrested, John says, not because Judas and the Jews had mutually agreed upon this, but because he himself had said, "I will mount the palm tree and grasp its fruits." That is why he was betrayed and arrested, held and tied up, taken away and put on exhibit, mocked and whipped, tried and condemned, crucified, killed, and buried. Whether or not he was right to think that the palm tree of the song is a reference to the cross, John Ford is unquestionably correct in his description of how Christ loves his people even unto death. And what can we say to such love? How do you respond to someone who sees more beauty in you than you can imagine? Someone who is willing to endure everything just to be with you? Well, I think that this is precisely why we need to pay attention to this woman, because she shows us, she models how to respond. See, she teaches us what it means to receive Jesus' love. How does she respond to her husband's constant overtures of love to her? Simple. She gives herself to him in return. I will give you my love. The most basic and most appropriate way to respond to the gift of Christ's love toward us is simply to give ourselves to him in return. You have overwhelmed me with your love, so I will give you my love. Now, that may seem abstract, intangible, but it's something that Christians inherently recognize because it's all throughout our hymnody. Like Bernard of Clairvaux's famous hymn, O Sacred Head Now Wounded. It's a meditation on the love of Christ and the suffering he was willing to endure on our behalf. And in the last stanza, it asks the question, what language shall I borrow to thank thee, dearest friend, for this thy dying sorrow, thy pity without end? How can I respond to such love? That's what Bernard is asking. And what is his answer? O make me thine forever. And should I fainting be, Lord, let me never, never outlive my love to thee. Or what about that wonderful 18th century hymn by Isaac Watts, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross? As the title implies, it's another meditation on the love of Jesus, seen from the perspective of the cross. And in the final stanza, Watts once again asks what response could possibly be adequate. And once again, the only answer that he can come up with is one which echoes the sentiments of the bride. Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were a present far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. Finally, what about that beloved Christmas carol? by the 19th century Anglican poet Christina Rosetti. In the Bleak Midwinter. I'm sure you know it. On this occasion, she isn't thinking so much about the love that inspired Christ to climb upon the cross, but rather the love that inspired him to come down to earth in the first place. But Christina's conclusion is still the same. Still, at the end of the hymn, she's left wondering how to respond to his love. And once again, her reply is the same. What can I give him, poor as I am? If I were a shepherd, I would bring a lamb. If I were a wise man, I would do my part. Yet what I give him, give my heart. What can I give? I will give you my love. The bride's words are not that different as those that Christians have prayed and sung for centuries. The only response to such love is to give ourselves in love in return. But that's not the only thing we learn from the bride, because she doesn't just want to express her love in private, though she certainly talks about doing that. She wants to display her love publicly for all to see. She wants to invite others to celebrate this man and his love with her. And isn't this precisely what Jesus invites his followers to do? He doesn't just ask them to give themselves to him in love. He invites us to share that love, to publicly proclaim it, to tell other people about his love and how they can experience it for themselves. The love that this woman feels for this man is infectious. It's something she can't keep to herself. She doesn't want to try. And in that way, she's a model for us. The Sri Lankan pastor D.T. Niles, he once described Christianity by saying that Christianity is one beggar telling another beggar where to find bread. That's true and wonderfully put. But perhaps with this song in mind, we might add something to it. Christianity is not only one beggar telling another beggar where to find bread. Christianity is also one ashamed and lonely person telling another where to find unending love.